meeting of the General Assembly since the murder of the Prime Minister of the Congo, Patrice Lumumba. History was being released by the new United Nations Command. That the first task of the United Nations is to allow the Congolese people to be ruled by a government of their own choice. The Congolese constitution provides a means by which such a government can be chosen. And we support the Kazenga government because it was chosen by this means and was the government that invited the United Nations to the Congo. The duty of the United Nations is not to force on the Congo this or that government, because the other states of the world think that any particular government should be a suitable one for the Congo. This is I therefore do not understand the emphasis which a number of powers lay on recognizing this or that government. Ultimately, it must be the Congolese people who choose their government and not the United Nations. What the United Nations must do is to see that the Congolese people have the opportunity to choose the government which they want. The present situation. My proposal is therefore that there should be, as soon as the United Nations have established law and order, a new general election conducted under United Nations supervision and under conditions where every political party can freely canvass for its policy without fear, without force, and without intimidation. Before, therefore, accepting a decision of the present Congolese parliament as an expression of the will of the nation, the United Nations must first satisfy itself that parliament is not meeting under duress and that the balance of political forces has not been changed by organized murder. Mr. President and distinguished delegates, what we need in the Congo is not a solution that is a compromise or seek to reconcile the divergent views between East and West. What we want is a solution acceptable to the Congolese people and which ensures peace and stability in Africa and thus excludes the Cold War from the continent. As I have said many times before, we in Africa have a vested interest in peace. What is taking place in the Congo today could lead to a serious conflagration, which would set us all ablaze and spare no one. Unless this unhappy and ominous trend is arrested at once, a major war will descend upon us again. If the proposals I am making succeed, we will be ensuring that the world is not only safe for ourselves in Africa, but also for the big powers. I believe that the plans I have put forward are entirely realistic and practical. Most people who have served or are serving with the United Nations in the Congo would agree with me. I believe that the African point of view at the United Nations headquarters in New York has now some influence in that the Secretary General is making use of the advisory committee, but this is not enough. The African viewpoint should also be much more fully represented at the United Nations headquarters in Libreville, in both the civil and the military spheres. United Nations headquarters in Libreville is divided into several military sections. On the civil side, I would like to see many more experienced Africans in position of authority than it is at present the case. On the military side, my feelings are the same. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, action in the Congo is urgent. Up till now, the United Nations has failed in the Congo. It entered the Republic to restore law and order. Yet today, mutinous troops roam the country, committing atrocities, rapine, murder, and all forms of indiscriminate killings. There is virtual civil war. The United Nations entered the Congo with a specific mandate to preserve the unity of the Republic. Instead, under the very shadow of the United Nations, the Katanga province is being, in practice, detached from the rest of the state and converted into a new type of Belgian colony. The first task of the United Nations was to secure the withdrawal of Belgian forces. Instead, Belgium has been allowed to establish what amounts, in fact, to a military dictatorship in Katanga. Belgian military equipment is supplied to rebels and separate forces before the eyes of the United Nations forces, who are powerless to intervene. United Nations presence in the Congo had to be based upon the solid political foundation of the consent of the Congolese people. This consent could only be expressed by the Congolese people through their elected representative, assembled in parliament, and through the government, which had been appointed by parliament in accordance with the Constitution of the Congo. Instead, the United Nations stood by passively while parliament was prevented from meeting by Mobutu in command of a band of mutineers. While in theory, the United Nations acknowledged the Constitution of the Congo Republic, it in fact collaborated with the very forces who denied its legitimacy. Distinguished delegates will recall that Mobutu claimed to have deposed both President Kasavubu and the government of Patrice Lumumba, and to have deposed all government but his own. He had no possible claim to exercise any legal authority. Nevertheless, the United Nations authorities in Libreville collaborated with his so-called College of Commissioners, which he had set up, and thus gave the mutineers not only authority, but also a ready supply of cash from the resources of the Congo. This the rebels employed in furthering their mutiny and in attempting to consolidate their position in opposition both to the president and to the Prime Minister, Patrice Lumumba. That such action what has happened to the principle so widely canvassed in theory that all aid should be channeled through the United Nations? The distinguished delegates of the United States, Mr. Adlai Stevenson, some little time ago, wrote an article in the London Sunday Times in which he pointed out the absolute madness of partitioning Africa economically along the pattern established in Europe. What indeed should the Congo be economically attached to the common market countries? Only one valid reason for this exists: the maintenance of Belgium's financial interest. Yet all this is going on under the shadow of the United Nations, and apparently with the active participation of the United Nations experts. There is a special voluntary United Nations Fund for restoring the Congo's economic life and carrying on its public services. The use to which this fund has been put has been a matter of great concern to us of the independent African states. It is now over 3 months ago since I wrote to the Secretary General
He has labored, he has suffered to lead his people into the land of freedom. He is the Redeemer and the champion of liberty, of human equality. Let's salute him, fellow Ghanaians, the nation's founder, Sergeant Kwame Nkrumah. May God bless him, Ghana show boy, Africa's great son, Sergeant Dr. Nkrumah.
Ago, when you come, Madam Kakra, and when you come and when Tiam Kakra, men Casapi. Damapara Makade, Bakan Kakra, and we Makan Fancy. At long last, the battle has ended. And thus, Ghana, your beloved country, is free forever. And yet again, I want to take the opportunity to thank the chiefs and people of this country, the youth, the farmers, the women who have shown knowledge. I want to thank the valiant ex-servicemen who have so cooperated with me in this mighty task of freeing our country from foreign rule and imperialism. And as I pointed out at our party conference at Sorbonne, I made it quite clear that from now on today, we are waking, we shall no more go back to sleep anymore. Today, from now on, there is a new African in the world. That new African is ready to fight his own battle and show that after all, the black man is capable of managing his own affairs. We are going to demonstrate to the world, to the other nations, young as we are, that we are play our own fight. I said in the assembly gives me African personality and identity. It's the only way in which we can show the world that we are ready for our own battle. But today, may I call upon you all that at this great day, let us all remember that nothing in the world can be done unless it has the purported support of God. We have done the battle, and we again rededicate ourselves not only in the struggle to emancipate other territories in Africa. Our independence is meaningless unless it is linked up with the total liberation of the African continent. Let us now, fellow Ghanaians, let us now ask for God's blessing. And for only 2 seconds, in your thousands and millions, I want to ask you to pause only for 1 minute and give thanks to Almighty God for having led us through obstacles, difficulties, imprisonments, hardship, and suffering to have brought us to the end of our trouble today. 1 minute silence. Ghana is free forever. And here, I will ask the band to play the Ghana national anthem. Freedom! Freedom! Africa's liberation and unity. Africa is rich and not poor. Africa has immense actual and potential wealth: gold, diamond, copper, manganese, bauxite, iron ore, uranium, asbestos, chrome, cobalt, a host of other minerals. Our essential agricultural produce have all been drained away by colonialist imperialism. Africa is far from being poor. It is Africans who are poor, not Africa. And they are poor because of the uncounted profit that has been made out of the exploitation of their labor and their lands. I raise this point so that it will stay in your minds when you may be tempted by the seductive promises of new colonialism to forget the real character of colonialist imperialism and be persuaded away from your own true interests and those of Africa. For today, we must each see ourselves as part of Africa in order that we may face colonialist imperialism and its new form, neocolonialism, on a continent-wide front. Make. First, the attainment of freedom and independence. Secondly, the consolidation of that freedom and independence. Thirdly, the creation of unity and community between the free African states. Fourth, the economic and social reconstruction of Africa. As I see it, our greatest danger stems from disunity and the inability to see that the realization of our hopes and aspirations, the realization of our objective of total African independence, and of our future progress and prosperity is inextricably bound up with the necessity to unify our policy and actions in connection with the continued struggle for independence and the greater task of economic and social reconstruction beyond it. We must therefore face the issue of African unity now, for only unity will make the artificial boundaries and regional demarcations imposed by colonialism obsolete and superfluous. African unity will thus provide an effective remedy for border disputes and internecine troubles. In a united Africa, there could be no frontier claims between Ethiopia and Somalia, or between Zanzibar and Kenya, Guinea or Liberia, or between Ghana, Togoland, and the Ivory Coast. Because we would regard ourselves as one great continental family of nations. Some of the leaders, it must be confessed, do not see the struggle of their brother Africans as part of their own struggle. Even if they did, they would not be free to express their solidarity. These rifts are consciously created by the imperialists between Africans, where they can sit back and watch with sly satisfaction, as well as contempt for those who fail to see how they are being used against Africa's best interests. Regrettably, those states include some who were among the freedom fighters of yesterday and who haven't won their independence, are willing to drop it for some token aid, and thereby deny to those still struggling for freedom even their moral support. Here is a phenomenon against which all African freedom fighters must be on their guard
and resist to the utmost. Even though I appreciate the difficulties facing us, I must admit, I find it strange to watch some of us returning willingly to the colonialist fold. This time, they don't even have the excuse of being forced to subject themselves to foreign domination. It makes one wonder why so much effort and sacrifice and so many lives were given up to the achievement of independence in the first place, if it can only be so quickly and easily surrendered. We must begin to build immediately our own continental common market. For it is easy for anyone who studies the common market organization closely to realize that the common market is aimed at harnessing the African countries to satisfy the profit lust of the imperialist bloc and to prevent us from following an independent neutralist policy. It is easy to see that the imperialists and the colonialists are determined to retain the African countries in the position of suppliers of cheap raw materials. If we do not resist this threat, and if we throw in our lot with the common market, we shall doom the economy of Africa to a state of perpetual subjection to the economy of Western Europe. This will, of course, hinder the industrialization of our young African states. It is impossible to think of economic development and national independence without possessing an unfettered capacity for maintaining a strong industrial power. The activities of the common market are therefore fraught with dangerous political and economic consequences for the independent African states. The organization constitutes an attempt to replace the old system of colonial exploitation by a new system of collective colonialism, which will be stronger and more dangerous than the old evils we are striving to liquidate from our continent. This is another reason why we should come together in a unified African economic plan, which, operating on a continental scale, can make a solid attack on the imperialist domination in Africa. We should, without delay, aim at the creation of a joint African military command. There is little wisdom in our present separate effort to build up and maintain defense forces, which in any case would be ineffective in a major world conflict. If we examine this problem realistically, we would ask, which single African state could protect itself against an imperialist aggressor? And how much more difficult this will be when some states are allowing the imperialists to maintain bases on their territories. I have already referred to the military forces which South Africa is raising and the danger it poses for the new African states and the struggle of those still in chains. Only our unity can provide us with anything like adequate protection. Those problems can best be met within a unified Africa, and it should be possible in the higher reaches of our endeavor to devise a constitutional structure which will secure the objectives I have outlined, and yet preserve the sovereignty of each of the countries joining the Union. Countries within the Union will naturally maintain their own constitutions, continue to use their own national emblems and national anthems and other symbols and paraphernalia of sovereignty. Regional associations and territorial groupings can only be other forms of balkanization unless they are conceived within the framework of a continental union. There are existing models which we can modify or adapt to our pattern. The United States of America, the Soviet Union, India, and China have proved the efficacy of unions embracing large stretches of land and population. Long live African freedom fighters. Long live African independence. Long live your struggle. Kind cannot escape the constant threat of war. Africa therefore appeals to the United Nations to live up to its reputation as the greatest bastion of world peace and demands that a meeting of this year's United Nations session should be devoted to the problem of colonialism in Africa. It is folly. It is folly for the colonialists to think that they can hold back forever the progress of history. The process of change is inherent in the interplay of social, economic, and political forces. It is true that these can be hindered and impeded and even bent to different purposes, but not forever. However, we who are concerned with the immediacy of African independence and unity are not prepared to wait upon the evolution of history. We are determined to give history a revolutionary push. We must adopt a positive, all-out anti-colonialist, anti-imperialist attack, and this quickly, for we cannot afford the luxury of delay. Time acts for the enemy, no less than for ourselves. Let us therefore examine our position seriously and objectively to see how well we have managed so far and evaluate our points of weakness and the necessary remedies. Let us determine what modifications are needed to adjust our strategy to counter the movements of the enemy and overcome him. This requires some plain speaking. And for the sake of Africa, let us speak plainly. As I said, our greatest danger stems from disunity and the inability to see that the realization of our hopes and aspirations, the realization of our objective of total African independence, and of our future progress and prosperity is inextricably bound up with the necessity to unify our policy and actions in connection with the continued struggle for independence and the greater task of economic and social reconstruction beyond it. We must therefore face the issue of African unity now, for only unity will make the artificial boundaries and regional demarcations imposed by colonialism obsolete and superfluous. African unity will thus provide an effective remedy for border disputes and internecine troubles. In a united Africa, there could be no frontier claims between Ethiopia and Somalia, or between Zanzibar and Kenya, Guinea or Liberia, or between Ghana, Togoland, and the Ivory Coast. Because we would regard ourselves as one great continental family of nations. Some of the leaders, it must be confessed, do not see the struggle of their brother Africans as part of their own struggle. Even if they did, they would not be free to express their solidarity. These rifts are consciously created by the imperialists between Africans where they can sit back and watch with slight satisfaction, as well as contempt for those who fail to see how they are being used against Africa's best interests. Regrettably, those states include some who were among the freedom fighters of yesterday and who haven't won their independence, are willing to drop it for some token aid, and thereby deny to those still struggling for freedom even their moral support. Here is a phenomenon against which all African freedom fighters must be on their guard and resist to the utmost. Even though I appreciate the difficulties facing us, I must admit, I find it strange to watch some of us returning willingly to the colonialist fold. This time, they don't even have the excuse of being forced to subject themselves to foreign domination. It makes one wonder, why so much effort and sacrifice and so many lives were given up to the achievement of independence in the first place, if it can only be so quickly and easily surrendered. Unhappily for us, to condition loyalties away from Africa towards the metropolis withdraws them. They are unable, it would appear, to accept the idea that Africans can get together to make viable and going concern of a combined African continent, but rather see their salvation in coming together in association like the Franco-African community mooted recently at Bangui. Although there are many here who speak English, French, Spanish, or Portuguese, nevertheless, we are all Africans. Africans fighting for Africa's independence, Africa's unity, Africa's future. I have said that I understand the difficulties of these states, which are drawing away from the African community back into that of Europe, faced with the demands of their people for rising standards of living and better social conditions, but charged with economies that can hardly meet the recurrent expenditures of administration and maintenance. They are in dilemma. And standing at their elbows are the new colonialist agents, beckoning them back with a smile into the web of imperialism, though it may have a new look this time and offer the irresistible bait of immediate help. This help will be far outweighed, as they will experience with no great loss of time by the knots into which their economies will be tied by the Euro-African Association. Imperialism does not change its nature. It only changes its front. It still needs colonial appendages, whether in name or in fact, to exploit and at the same time to support its Cold War strategy. In the face of this serious threat to our economy, independence in Africa, we must begin to build immediately our own continental common market. For it is easy for anyone who studies the Common Market Organization closely to realize that the common market is aimed at harnessing the African countries to satisfy the profit lust of the imperialist bloc and to prevent us from following an independent neutralist policy. It is easy to see that the imperialists and the colonialists are determined to retain the African countries in the position of suppliers of cheap raw materials. If we do not resist this threat, and if we throw in our lot with the common market, we shall doom the economy of Africa to a state of perpetual subjection to the economy of Western Europe. This will, of course, hinder the industrialization of our young African states. It is impossible to think of economic development and national independence without possessing an unfettered capacity for maintaining a strong industrial power. The activities of the common market are therefore fraught with dangerous political and economic consequences for the independent African states. The organization constitutes an attempt to replace the old system of colonial exploitation by a new system of collective colonialism, which will be stronger and more dangerous than the old evils we are striving to liquidate from our continent. There is an alternative to Euro-African Association with these deadly implications for Africa's independence and progress. It is in an African economic community in which we can all pool our production and our trade to a common advantage. It is not difficult to imagine that the new colonialists would describe this as a pooling of poverty. It is, however, too simple a distortion of fact. Africa is rich and not poor. As the great wealth that has been taken out of our continent over 5 centuries of spoliation and extortion very well proves. Africa has immense actual and potential wealth: gold, diamond, copper.
Of Africa's struggle against colonialism. Ghana's first president, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, took the world by storm as he led his nation to become the first black African nation to gain independence from the European powers. But just as Nkrumah's revolutionary leadership in Ghana would trigger a wave of independence movements all across sub-Saharan Africa, his gradual descent into authoritarianism and his sudden overthrow would also become a familiar story across many of Africa's newly independent states. This is the story of how Dr. Kwame Nkrumah went from being Ghana's messiah and faultless hero to a political pariah whose ultimate demise would lead to wild celebrations on the streets by the very same people that had once loved and adored him. At his headquarters at Christiansburg Castle, a 17th century slaving fort from where British governors had ruled the crown colony of the Gold Coast for over 50 years, Sir Charles Alden Clark woke up on the morning of the 9th of February 1951, facing the most difficult decision of his career. His problem centered around a 41-year-old prisoner who had been held at James Fort in Accra on a 3-year sentence for subversionary activities. In the eyes of the colonial authorities, this prisoner was a dangerous troublemaker who, even while in chains, was a serious threat to the stability of the colony. According to official reports, the man Kwame Nkrumah was a thoroughgoing communist, and in unofficial communications was even described by Governor Arden Clark as the local Hitler. You see, prior to Nkrumah's arrest, the British officials had drawn up a carefully constructed plan for the colony's slow and steady transition into full independence. Under this plan, the Gold Coast was to have what the British called a semi-responsible government, and for the first time in the country's history, there would be a general election to elect a new National Assembly and Executive Council composed of mainly African representatives. And in putting together this plan, the British officials had collaborated with an elite group of Gold Coast lawyers, businessmen, and academics who had long been calling for the reforms. Referred to by the British as men of property and standing, this group of Gold Coast elites had formed the nation's first major political party in 1947, known as the United Gold Coast Convention, and their campaign slogan was self-government in the shortest possible time. Their leader, Dr. Joseph Boachier Danquah, was highly respected by the British and many within the emerging Gold Coast political elite. A bona fide intellectual, J.B. Danquah had studied law in the UK and was a qualified barrister called to the prestigious London Inner Temple. Spearheading the earliest push for Ghana's independence, Danquah personally prepared the first draft of his nation's new constitution and also suggested that the new nation be called Ghana, in honor of the 13th century Empire of Ghana, located in modern-day Mali. Looking to spread their message to the masses and build popular support for their push for independence, Danquah and his UGCC colleagues decided that they needed to hire a full-time organizer to help spread their message and galvanize the public. It was here that an unknown activist named Kwame Nkrumah was recommended to them. Nkrumah at the time had been out of the country for 12 years, pursuing his studies in the US and England, and although he was neither rich nor well-connected, he was politically ambitious, highly motivated, and hungry for change. While in the US, he had earned degrees in economics, sociology, and philosophy, and although he had moved to London in pursuit of a law degree, he got completely distracted by activism as he befriended a number of prominent British communists with whom he regularly participated in anti-colonial protests. But while his activism was food for the soul, it wasn't putting food on the table. The young Nkrumah often found himself short of funds and was in desperate need for a stable source of income. When offered a job by Danquah's United Gold Coast Convention, he grabbed the opportunity with both hands and moved back to the Gold Coast. Nkrumah, Danquah, and the other founding members of the UGCC, Ebenezer Akwaje, Edward Akufo-Addo, Emmanuel Obetsebi Lamte, and William Oforiatta, would all be collectively known in Ghanaian political folklore as the Big Six. Within less than 2 years, Nkrumah had fallen out with the other members of the Big Six. While Danquah and co were happy to cooperate with the colonial government's proposal for a slow and steady transition of power, Nkrumah began calling for independence immediately. Nkrumah subsequently broke away from the UGCC and started his own party, known as the Convention People's Party. Unlike the prim, proper, and gentlemanly UGCC, which was well supported by the colony's economic and cultural elites, Nkrumah's CPP was a radical political machine that focused on stirring up the emotions of the masses with revolutionary songs, catchy slogans, and provocative posters. The CPP also set up media outlets which would work day and night to raise anti-colonial sentiment in the public by vilifying the colonial authorities and labeling the UGCC as colonial collaborators. In opposition to the UGCC slogan of self-government in the shortest possible time, Nkrumah's CPP would call for self-government now and would declare that the draft constitution prepared by J.B. Danquah was bogus and fraudulent. traveling all around the country and delivering fiery speeches, Nkrumah gained a massive following by promising civil servants, office clerks, petty traders, construction workers, and primary school teachers that all of their grievances and hardships would disappear once colonial rule had been brought to an end. Many of his supporters would grow to see him as a literal messiah, sent from the heavens with the sole purpose of freeing them from the shackles of colonial oppression and ushering in a bright new dawn of peace and prosperity for all. Embracing the halo that had been placed on his head by the masses, Nkrumah would famously encourage his supporters to seek first the political kingdom, and all else would follow. And so even when the colonial government began readying the colony for its first elections in 1951, Nkrumah maintained that the British plan for a slow and steady transition to independence was nothing more than a massive scam. Taking matters into their own hands, Nkrumah and his party members mobilized a mass disturbance with strikes, boycotts, and mass demonstrations, which were intended to force the British to agree to immediate self-government. Following the subsequent outbreak of civil unrest, the Governor Charles R. Clark declared a state of emergency and ordered the arrest of Nkrumah and his associates. Nkrumah was subsequently convicted on 3 charges of incitement and sedition and sentenced to 3 consecutive prison terms of 1 year each. But far from stopping the CPP, Nkrumah's arrest would energize his base even more, as his status as a true revolutionary had